Hi folks, I'm Sheila and welcome to Counsellor Convos. Let's get stuck in. Hi folks, welcome to another edition of Counsellor Convos. For those that don't know me, I'm Sheila McMahon. I'm a registered mental health counsellor. Now, for this podcast, we're going to be talking about suicide prevention in the construction industry. And the reason why we're talking about this is a recent national statistic, that's a hard word to say, but basically it was saying that workers in the construction industry were 4 times more likely to die by suicide than any other sector. So this was something that I wanted to explore more about this and just to kind of be curious about this from lots of different perspectives, folks. So I am delighted to have Lorraine Gregory with me today. Welcome, Lorraine.
Hello, Sheila. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And I believe you're a virgin to the podcast world.
I am. This is my very first podcast, so please be kind.
Oh, of course, Lorraine, of course. So Lorraine, for the listeners, if you can introduce yourself in whatever way feels comfortable for you.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. So as Sheila's already said, my name is Lorraine Gregory. I'm the Executive Director for an organisation called CECA Midlands. That's CECA, standing for the Civil Engineering Contractors Association. We are a membership organisation who have over 300 members across the UK, but about 80 members here in the Midlands. The subject we're going to talk about today is really important to us because here in CECA, one of our key objectives is how we support the industry around health, safety and well-being. And obviously the well-being and mental health element is very important to us. And that's really about ensuring that how can we support the industry to create a safer workplace in every aspect, from physical, emotional to mental health, to obviously being out in sight in terms of those the things that they have to complete in terms of, personal protective equipment and things like that. So it's a really important subject to us.
Absolutely. I hear that passion coming across. Lorraine and myself had a chat last week and we're like, wow, we need to record this. We need to have a chat about this. Lorraine, going back to that statistic, I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
So it's a real tough statistic. Again, that is a hard word.
It is a hard word. It's not just
it's a hard word to say.
It's not just me. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a real tough statistic. And I think, it's one that we all need to be mindful of in our sector. We do have a sector which has a certain demographic that works within it, which is males of a certain age, of where males of that certain age are also people who are more likely to commit suicide, unfortunately. Yeah. So as a sector, I think we need to, be aware of that. But I think also as a sector, we need to think about, well, what can we do to support that demographic and our workforce in making sure in every single way that they go home at the end of a day to their family and friends in that safe and well manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear that support is really important and we will explore that. Absolutely. What I found quite interesting, Lorraine, was from our chat last week was explore the different perspectives, because I know you're very passionate about the construction industry, and also that there was kind of like that the thing of this statistic could almost create a bit of labeling, almost like as if it's the construction's fault as to why that's happening. And we were exploring other perspectives on this. That exactly one of the things you mentioned there, the demographic, it tends to be that age group, unfortunately, the male age group that tend to die by suicide. So we were looking at lots of different perspectives, because I know that was important for you, Lorraine. So I really want to
highlight this. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have to explore this. I mean, that is the stat. That is the stat that we have in our industry. But I actually think that if it wasn't for the sector, could that be even worse, really? In terms of the industry has got many organisations that I work with, and from the top to the bottom, in terms of organisations, in large, small, medium organisations, we're seeing lots of support for individual employees around all aspects of health, but we're talking about obviously mental health here today. There is lots of programs, and I could reel off a multitude of those. So my sort of issue is, I actually want construction to be seen as an organisation that supports people, supports people through these issues, rather than get labelled in probably a negative way that says the construction industry has got this high level of suicide, which sometimes can infer that the construction industry is the reason behind the suicide. And I don't necessarily believe that's the case. I think we have much wider societal issues for individuals. That individuals are dealing with lots of different things. We know that social media has a big impact on suicide. We know that people's life choices have a big impact on their mental health state. We know that I'm not at one moment sitting here and saying work is not a contributor.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, we know in our industry that we need to look after people, and we need to do better in certain things. We do have an industry where you could be working away from home. That can be stressful. We do have an industry that works long hours at times. That can be stressful. We do have an industry whereby, at certain times of a project, there's pressure points, which can be stressful. So I think we have to identify what are our issues within the industry and what are we doing about them. And I think we are doing an awful lot around those things, and identifying about having lots more mental health first aiders in the industry, people undertaking training from things such as our mental health, suicide awareness, and other contributors such as menopause awareness, diabetes training, because we've got all these different health issues that can all be a contributor to somebody's mental health. So I think we have to look at it much wider as a societal issue, and actually therefore is construction supporting the issues that society brings to them, rather than construction being labelled as this is an industry that has a high suicide rate.
Absolutely, Lorraine. Like, I love the fact you get that point across, because I know that was so important to you. And it was when we had a chat, I realized, yeah, absolutely, it could be labelled, it could be seen this way in a negative light, whereas actually the construction industry is doing loads to help people with mental health. There's also the factor as well of personal responsibility. I'm a big advocate for this, because I think while we go to work, while we engage in different things with society, there has to be a level of self-awareness and becoming aware of how sometimes we get in our own way. Because I think it can become a bit of a blame culture. It's somebody else's fault, it's work's fault. I think it's really important for people within that industry and any industry to learn how to use their voice and to speak up when things are a problem. So like even last week, I would have done it was Mental Health Awareness Week. I would have done a couple of talks for JCB. And I am big on taking personal responsibility, because it can't be you making everybody else okay. No, it has to be a togetherness. It has to be we're doing our bit as individuals to take responsibility if we need to, build our confidence, be able to speak out more, stuff like that. Because a lot of times mental health, it's very introverted, it's very in your head. You would think you're the only person going through it, but until you speak to other people, you realise, that there's other people going through it. And also, it's very easy. Mental health, because I've been through it myself, it feels so personal. It feels so personal when you're in that depression, when you're in that anxiety. You think the whole world is out to get you. And you can easily make assumptions. So what that might look like in the construction industry is that, my manager doesn't care about me, or he's always giving out about me. We could have a glass half full or a glass half empty attitude. So you're going to pick up on that. So we've got to look at our own self-responsibility as well. Do you agree with me, Lorraine, with that?
I absolutely do. And I think yes, we've all got a responsibility to speak up, and but we also have to understand that it sometimes is really difficult to do. And that's sometimes the difference between somebody taking their own life and not taking their own life.
Yeah.
And that's where that blocker is. But I think the industry is trying to break down those barriers.
Okay.
As a society, again, I think this is a society issue, and we all know that over many, many years, we've had different ways of being, of acting, depending on our gender, depending on our culture, depending on who we are and where we've come from, our upbringing, a variety of things. And so breaking down that barrier, particularly to a male-dominated workforce, which unfortunately we still are a male-dominated workforce, is really important to say it's actually okay to speak up, and it's okay to have these conversations. And I think we are getting that way now, with society talking a lot more about mental health, which is great. But I think in the construction industry, we're really advanced in that. We're really advanced in actually lots of companies have got their own initiatives. They've got time to talk days. They've got mental health well-being days. They've got, a variety of mental health first aiders across a multitude of sites and projects. They've got their signposting people to all additional support. And we have to think, and also in our industry, we have the Lighthouse charity.
Actually, Lorraine, the Lighthouse charity, can you say more about that for anybody that might know about it, please?
Yeah, so the Lighthouse charity is a charity predominantly for the construction sector, and they are there to support people, a 24/7 sort of hotline. So there's always somebody there at the end of the phone if somebody wants to give them a call if they're for any need. Now they look at the whole spectrum of individuals, and I think sometimes the Lighthouse charity isn't really understood even by some of our people that work in the industry. So they are there to help people in a multitude of ways. And we know in the society that we live in now, and the challenges that we have with the current environment, such as things like inflation and just being really hard to survive sometimes, that they can support individuals with finance advice. They can help support people with maybe food parcels, but they are also there as an avenue and an outlet to pick up that phone if you're going through any personal distress. We have obviously in this country got Samaritans as well, and I know for us, particularly in Seeker Midlands, we nominate a charity every year, and for us it's Samaritans, because we have ourselves, through our membership, been affected as a result of suicide, which is such a sad being, really. So I think it's really important that where we've got these outlets of support, that we as an industry support them as well, who are supporting our workforce. And there's a lot of that goes on. But the Lighthouse charity, the Samaritans, the actual industry, if you spoke to me sort of even, I'm going to say maybe 8 years ago about mental health in our industry, was it talked about as much as it is now? It probably was talked about, but it didn't have the prevalence that it certainly have now. When I go into companies and they've got posters on the wall about, signposting to services, but a lot of companies are also supporting people to take their own personal responsibility, where they're offering them counselling services. So they're saying, we will help you and we will provide you with this support. I could tell you a multitude of stories of support that I've seen that have really helped people, and it just needs that.
I'd love for you to share a story, actually, if you don't mind. I was just thinking about that, about some of your experiences within your work and people's stories.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a personal story from a few years ago, and we was around the COVID times, and I think I got a phone call from a colleague who said, I've got a real problem. And I said, oh, what's the matter? And he said, well, I've got a colleague who is in a desperate state. Lots of things have happened, COVID's hit, the business is being affected financially. But unfortunately as well, all this stress has led to his marriage breakdown. He's really up against the wall, and he's struggling to buy the next shop. And on top of it all, his washing machine broke. Oh, and it's always the thing, that last little thing at the end, isn't it?
The straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, it's always that last thing. Yeah. So there was a multitude of things that this individual was dealing with, from quite severe, what's going to happen with my business, what's going to happen with my family, where am I going to live, and then his washing machine broke, and and then he was like, and I need a washing machine. Yeah. So actually, one of the things that I did do is I said, actually, let me speak to this individual. We talked about it. And one of the big things that he needed was a washing machine and a shop, and a weekly shop. Yeah. So we did refer him to the Lighthouse charity at that time. I referred him in, and he did take that personal responsibility. He did have that chat. And what was lovely, what came back to me via that gentleman, was that he did get the support, and they were able to provide him a food package and some very short-term, some financial support, but financial advice for his business to help him get things back on track. So by just opening up about, I need a new washing machine, actually served a greater purpose, where he was able to get through a number of things, because he'd explored different avenues, and he'd opened up about how he was feeling and all the issues that were piling up, and they could get the right experts in to help him. And he continues with his business to this day.
Wow, Lorraine. I mean, what a fabulous story. And I think stories are so important, because you never know who is listening to this podcast. And you might have somebody who's in a similar situation and might know that there is actually help out there, financial help out there. If somebody needs that weekly shop, or somebody needs that washing machine, that sometimes with your mental health, yes, it's great to be able to talk, but sometimes you need practical help, actually. So that's so useful to know. It sounds like that the Lighthouse can help in many different ways. Does it have funding then, or finance available, but it can help in some, obviously in this case, there was the case of the washing machine and the weekly shop. So, that there is financial support there from the Lighthouse industry.
Yes, there is. So, I mean, obviously, it all has to be assessed and everything else that they do. But there is obviously, that's what I'm saying, that it's not just about picking up the phone to say to somebody that, that is the important thing, to pick up the phone and say, I'm in dire straits. But there is a multitude of things that they can support construction workers with. But what I often find as well is just speaking to your employer in our industry goes a long way, actually, because there's lots of things that people are prepared to do to help. And that's what I always find in this industry, that people want to help other people. And I think you'd be surprised by how many people are affected. So we ran a suicide prevention awareness training session a couple of weeks ago now. It was a full course, full cohort, and it was a fantastic course. There were 16 individuals on that course, and the majority of people on that course had an experience of some engagement with suicide. They were all random people from all random. I don't mean random in that way. They were all from random companies. They'd never all really met before. They'd all come together for this course, and so they were able to talk, share experiences, and support each other. But the premise of that course was not necessarily about them in that moment. Obviously that did help them, but it was about how they could take that away back into their business, and how they can be more aware of things that might be going wrong for an individual, and things that they can be putting in place to make sure that we try and deal with this terrible statistic that we have as an industry. So this is what I mean when I say actually the industry is so supportive and is so on point with looking at this issue already. And I just want it to be really seen that actually this isn't an industry that people shouldn't enter because they think, oh my God, I'm going to suffer severe mental health. Actually, I think this is an industry that actually supports mental health in a really positive way, and actually can help people through that process, because they're very aware of the subject and they're very on point with putting things in place and supporting people. And yes, we still have the statistics, so there is still more to do. But actually, if we're talking about it and we're already thinking about what next, what more can we do, then that's a really good place to be in, isn't it?
Absolutely, Lorraine. Like, you're such an advocate for it. How long have you been part of Seeker?
So for me, for Seeker, it's just over 2 years. So I've worked in the industry for a number of years. I previously worked at an organisation called CITB, which is the Industry Training Board. And actually, a lot of this mental health training was supported by them when it was first emerged through that skills system. And I think, we can't do enough on this subject, because until we've got people not taking their lives, and we have a statistic of 0, which wouldn't that be utopia, really? But that's what we all need to aim for. And I mean that across society, not just in our sector, because every time we have somebody who takes their lives in this sector, it affects that individual, it affects their families, it has a wider reach, and it also affects other people in the sector as well, doesn't it? So it affects the people that they work with, and there's lots of questions for them about terms of what more could we have done. And actually, we don't want anybody having any of those feelings, do we? We want everybody to go to work, go home safe. And, it's not life that we're all happy all of the time, and we all have to acknowledge that that's never going to happen. But we just want people to be able to have that opportunity. But I go back to this point again around, actually, construction's doing a lot. How is society supporting construction? Do we have enough services of supporting construction who are doing a good job in supporting their employees?
A fair question. What do you think, Lorraine?
I don't think we do have enough support in society.
What would you like to see, Lorraine? How might that look like? Do you know what I mean? What would you like to see as regards help from society?
Yeah, I think, we have an overstretched NHS system. We have to acknowledge that. And we know that mental health services are under-resourced in the system. But actually, prevention is better than cure. So if we've got a sector that recognises they've got a problem and they are investing in it, but they're doing as much as they possibly can, how can the societal system, via their mental health services, further support construction? They know construction is an area that is seeing these rates of suicide. So what can they bring to support us further to prevent that?
And it makes me wonder, and again, this is just about throwing out different questions. We won't have all the answers, but it is about having open conversations. And it makes me wonder, how can they help? Or in what way?
It's about root cause as well, isn't it? It's about root cause, Sheila. If even mental health service can understand what are key root causes. It's not going to be the same root cause for everybody, of course. There's always a multitude of issues. But let's think about young males and suicide rates with young males who are single fathers. That's quite high. That's quite high. So actually, if that's a root cause and they're working in the construction sector as well, is there something around that route that can be supported so those issues don't blow up? What are we know that in our sector we have regular drug and alcohol testing, so you do have to, because you're working on a dangerous site. Quite often, is that a cause? We don't know. We wouldn't think it was a cause, but I'm sure it is. So there is.
And Lorraine, just to pause with that, what I'm loving about our conversation is that it leads into stuff that I'm already thinking about. So I'm about to ask a question about a certain thing, and then you go into that topic. So I'm loving that. Just to kind of share some of my own professional experiences is that I am on the books for about four different construction companies. So what that means is that when one of the employees, if let's say is really struggling and they're willing to engage with counselling, they make contact with me and I set that up and I have sessions with that person. There's actually one construction company that I'm so proud of that I think I've counselled about two-thirds of their staff. And I think it's a case of that because they rely on not your typical counsellor. And my setup is lovely here, it really is, whether it's on the phone or whether it's in person. However, now when we look at some of the root causes, one of a common issue I come across is actually addiction, alcohol and drugs. So what I do come across is particularly, and it's mainly blokes when they're working away from home, that sometimes there is a culture of, oh, we'll go to the pub, we'll drink as much as we can, taking drugs, and over a period of time that becomes an addiction. And then what happens is, as you know, there has to be testing for that because you need workers to be cognitive, to be there, to be present to do their jobs. And then sometimes you have some workers where they lose their jobs because they fail those tests. Again, prevention is better than cure. I wonder, like this is what I see on a one-to-one basis counselling some of these workers. I wonder, have you ever come across that as an issue in the industry?
I think it is there, and I think we have to be really honest. And I know, unfortunately, as you've just said, people have taken these drug and alcohol tests and they failed them. And unfortunately, that's a condition of the contract, and therefore they do lose their jobs. So yes, it is there. I think it's about how, when people are working away, what's provided for individuals when they're working away as well, and what mechanisms are put in place. And I think as an industry we still need to think a bit more about that, if I'm really honest. I think what often happens is at the end of a day people go and have a meal in a restaurant or in a pub, don't they, because that's what's being provided for them. And obviously there is alcohol about that. But I think when we talk about addiction, quite often addiction is an outlet for another issue at times.
Yeah.
And so I go back to, is the addiction the root cause, or what's the root cause of the addiction?
Yeah.
And I think we need to really consider that and think about that. And I think it's also about thinking about, are we putting people in the right scenarios for their well-being, so making sure we understand our staff and understand their issues. So if they are, for example, a single parent and there's a stress of working away, how can that individual be supported so they can support their family if they're a single parent, or if they've got visitations and things like that. And this is where I go, and I think goes back to your comment about personal responsibility. It's always about everything can, in the main, be sorted through a conversation. It can be, if we've opened Pandora's box and we say these are our issues, sometimes there's really simple and tangible things that can be put in place for that not to become an issue. But unless the Pandora's box been open, you don't know what you don't know. And I think quite often employers, as I've said, are quite supportive of individuals and about supporting individuals. There's going to be times where we don't always get our way, but that's life, isn't it? That is life. But I think that's about what can be done to help and get that compromise. And that's where we really are here. But I think ultimately employers are supporting. You've said yourself, you've worked with a number of companies giving counselling. So what they're actually looking at doing there is looking at what's the root issue.
Yeah. Absolutely, Lorraine. Like I'm really thinking about that, about the working away. I mean, sometimes it's a bit of a shock, especially for young lads. Sometimes young lads can't wait to get away, and then they go away and realize, oh, what do I do now? All this responsibility. I'm not used to doing that. I want to go back home. So it can be a bit of a shock to the system, you know. So
The other option of that is if some people haven't got a family environment, then their workplace becomes a family environment. So there's pros and cons to everything, and it depends where you are in your life situation. You know, many people have created a family through work, not just
yeah,
in construction, in many sectors,
yeah,
because they didn't have a family or a good family experience. As they've grown up. So, you know, sometimes having a job that takes you away from home can be a
yeah,
good thing. But I actually think, you know, the industry also is looking at things. There's been some projects and some research, a couple of projects called TimeWise about done some research into working hours on site and how they can have more flexible working hours and
yeah.
change the cultures. And they're looking at that's been a really positive experience for the companies that have been involved, actually. And they've
Mm.
said not just for the individuals, but also for the business. They found that
Well, you
productivity
want
levels
it to be a win-win
yeah,
situation.
you want it to be a
Yeah,
win-win situation. So productivity is increased, people are feeling much happier,
yeah,
you know, there's less sickness. I think there is things that the industry is still exploring to improve, and they will continue to do that because they recognise that if we don't have the right culture as a sector, then we won't get the right people. We won't get people working in our sector.
yes.
But I think when people are in this sector, they get an awful lot of support. And I think construction is really aware of those societal issues that might be coming into the workforce, and they're preparing themselves ready to support the workforce.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you mention about culture, because exactly that some people may be born into a culture where you do go to the pub every night and where you're saying, oh, you know, it's a drinking culture, that's what we do, or a drugs culture, that's what we do. So sometimes, and I come across this a lot, where people really mean well, that sometimes they might be a mate to another member of staff, and then it's like out drinking late, and then it becomes the habit. Sometimes it really comes from a place of not knowing, if you like, that sometimes people are in that culture. And I think that's where we need to look at what society is part of all this. Is it just the construction industry? No, of course it's not. It just happens to have that demographic where it is that age group and mainly males. But there is, and yet, as you say yourself, Lorraine, there are cost factors within the construction industry, but then there's many other factors that we need to look at this objectionally. It's certainly the culture. I think that is, I think for myself as well, Lorraine, because I come across that so much that often it becomes a bit of fun. It becomes a bit of fun when we're going to the pub all the time. That's their socialising. That's what it combats loneliness, if you like. But then what can happen is what can start off as just having, you know, the drinks and the drugs and, you know, enjoy that, whatever. I'm not here to judge, you know, whatever people want to do. But however, it can easily become an addiction without them realizing it. So I suppose for me, what I'd like to see, if it's not done already, and it probably is just conversations as to how we can help each other. Because sometimes there might be people that come from a culture that might, on the face of it, mean well, but it mightn't be helping them, especially in the long term. And it's almost like, how can we look out for each other? How can we become aware of that? That's something that becomes, oh, this is fine, this is all a bit of fun, but then becomes an addiction. It's almost, let's catch it earlier. So, because I suppose what you don't want is a group of workers going off up to Liverpool or any other city in the UK where they come from, an upbringing where we get drunk all the time, we take drugs, because if you do that consistently, it will become an addiction. So it's almost like if we talk about it, if we kind of get people together, as you do like with the suicide prevention, as to how much do our upbringing have an impact on this? How much does peer pressure have how much does loneliness have an impact on this? And almost together, what could we do differently? Like, I love the fact that you have some guys, and I know I'm emphasizing the guys, I know there's women in this too. So, do you know what I mean? That I'm certainly not ignoring that part. That sometimes different guys, women, they might have a football group, they might have some sort of an activities group where that's an outlet for them, because it can be very frustrating working in the construction industry, as with any other industry, the pressures, the timelines, you're relying on so many people to get the end goal done. So we need outlets for all of that. Alcohol is one, drugs is another, but we need more healthy outlets. So I love the idea of almost encouraging the workers to come up with solutions themselves and to become aware of their upbringings might not be having the most helpful influence on them.
Absolutely great. And I think you've made a really important point there. You know, we've talked predominantly about men, because the statistics does tell us it is predominantly men that are committing suicide in our sector. But I think there's another point which the industry is really aware of, and that is around that diversity which is in the industry, and how they're trying to expand the industry to become more attractive to people from different backgrounds, from different genders, from different ethnicities. And actually, that's having a better mix of people within our industry can only be a support to figures around mental health, because when we are surrounded by a myriad of different people with different views and different opinions, it breaks cycles, because you see different experiences, you see different cycles, you see different ways of enjoyment, you see lots of different things. Where if you do what you've always done, like you said, you've come from a family that's then gone on to do that, and you've copied that learned behaviour, you're in a cycle. Where actually, if we can expose people to such the myriad of cultures that we have in this country, which is fantastic, and we can bring different feelings and thoughts and thinking practices and work practices and cultures into it, it actually starts to break down a lot of those things that are normal, because different things become normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is so much we could do. I think there's a lot of education around it. Like, I'm a firm believer in that we're all human at the end of the day, and that we can all come from good intentions, but mightn't be aware of some of the things we're saying, some of the things that we're doing. And I think it's important that we all own that. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I would say to clients, is there anything, especially when we do a review, is there anything that you want to make me aware of that I might not be aware of? I could be doing some odd habit that might be very distracting. I think it's really important. With that in mind, Lorraine, I hope you don't mind me emphasizing a point. And it's something that, because we know there's a stigma with suicide, and one of the things that I'm passionate about is the language that we use. So what I would really encourage is to take away the word commit suicide, and that somebody died by suicide. Because there is something in the word commit that we associate commit a sin, commit a crime. There is something about that word that feeds on the stigma. And I hope you don't mind me saying that, because I've just heard that a couple of times, Lorraine.
No, that's fine. I've never actually, and again, goes back to my point. Nobody's ever said that ever to me. So actually, that's something that already we're starting to explore different conversations and different ways of seeing the subject of suicide, isn't it? That language, it's just a language that I've always heard, but actually that's right to challenge that. And absolutely, I will take that away, and I think I will start spreading that message myself, because it's a great point. So thank you.
You're very welcome, Lorraine. And like, that's the thing, I suppose. I love that in the moment. A lot of people are afraid to say something because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. So I could have been afraid to say something to you because I don't want to hurt your feelings and stuff like that. But what happens is that if nothing is said, then nobody's any the wiser. And the thing was is the way, because I know we know each other anyway, so I
Yeah.
knew I could bring that up here in the podcast, and I purposely did that where this wasn't preempted or any of that, because I wanted to highlight how to have a healthy conversation to bring something into somebody's awareness, but it's how you do it. Like, I'm not going, you shouldn't be saying that, and how dare you say that? And you'd be like, delete, end podcast. Thank you very much, Sheila. That there's actually ways of having, I suppose for some people it might be uncomfortable to bring something up, to bring something in their awareness, because again, they're afraid to upset somebody else. But we can, like, unfortunately, it doesn't help anybody at the end of the day.
No, and that's the whole point of this conversation, isn't it? The whole point of this conversation is for us all to move forward as a society around this subject of mental health and suicide.
Yeah.
We all have to start somewhere. And for anybody out there, be it in our sector or across society, we need to be able to feel comfortable and brave enough to speak out in whatever that might be, in a challenge of language, or just you're going through a hard time, or you feel frustrated. Talk to people, and that's the point of all of this. Is the statistics are the statistics, and we don't want them to be there actually at all. That doesn't serve anybody a purpose, really. We want to make sure that everybody ultimately feels they've got somewhere to turn and someone that they can talk to, and they can raise any issue without recrimination, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I might not speak to you in the pub next time I see you, Sheila. But,
I was wondering when the backlash would happen.
Yeah, really serious subject. You know, I think that's a really valid point, and something that I'd never thought about before. You know, in terms of when you said it, like committing a crime and things like that. Because actually, quite often, you know, people are in a very dark place and have a multitude of thoughts and feelings going on, and all we want to do is avoid those thoughts and feelings. And hopefully, you know, as society puts things in place, but also within our sector, we're becoming a lot more aware of issues that are coming with individuals, and we are able to support those individuals. Because, you know, wouldn't it be lovely that in, you know, next year or the year after, we're sitting doing this podcast and actually saying what a success the industry has had, because these statistics have gone down with great detriment, you know, in a positive way. So that's our ultimate aim here.
Absolutely, Lorraine. Like, and you know, with the listeners, I really encourage people that, you know, that if you've got any ideas, any advice, you know, for the industry, to put that forward, or anything. Well, I'd love the idea of other construction industries or companies that have put some processes in place that have really worked for them. So, because I think we just need to open up the chat, learn what can be done, what way somebody might have approached something, what procedures they put in place to get a positive outcome. What I'd love is, well, Lorraine, can you send me the details? I know you did ages ago, but can you send me the details to the Lighthouse, please?
Absolutely will.
And we'll certainly, you know, I'm sure Ben will put that in the information with this podcast. Wow, Lorraine, like, thank you so much for taking the time out to be here today. And I can hear how much that Sika is doing. You are an amazing advocate for Sika, and that there is so much support out there. So it is a case of, let's, you know, it's like that thing, you can bring the horse to water, but you can't make a drink. It's got to be a win-win. There is support out there, but if there's any workers listening to this podcast that are struggling, call the Lighthouse, speak to their manager, because everybody wants this to be a win-win situation. We want people to be happy at work. Like, I know that from counselling so many guys in the construction industry, they tend to stay in their jobs because the company obviously cares about them, and there's a loyalty then, and you want a culture of well-being, a culture of, you know, if things are unhelpful, we're able to say it, but in the nicest way possible, and because we all want the same thing, Lorraine.
Yeah, absolutely. I Couldn't agree with you more, Sheila. But thank you for having me today and allowing me to talk about this subject, because it is something that's really important in our sector, really important to our members, and really important to us in Seeker, that we support our members and our industry through these challenges and sometimes uncharted waters. We're all learning all the time.
Yeah, we absolutely are. So again, Lorraine, thank you for your time today, and no doubt we'll see you again soon. You are still talking to me, Lorraine, aren't you?
I am, Sheila, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Lorraine. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Counsellor Convos with Sheila McMahon. If you've enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to the channel.